Philosophy? What? If you have ever come across philosophy in your life, given that it was something more than cheesy, new agey, empty commandments, like embrace the universe, or love the lovers, or milk your dog, or some other open-ended nonsense, the chances are high that even if you have enjoyed some philosophical ideas or schools of thought here and there, you have been skeptical of the relevance of the whole show. Hanging out with a group of long dead, some very long dead fellow philosophers, with odd names and surly faces, or dealing with a confusing mix of complex concepts with bombastic labels doesn't sound too great. Hearing something like Plato's argument for the immortality of the soul, especially if you're on the irreligious side, could make the situation much worse. You're like, come on. How could this? Thoughts of a long dead stump about some nonsense soul crap be even remotely related to anything important or interesting in my life? Who the hell cares? And this is a very understandable concern. If philosophy is just about discussing this kind of stuff without any attempt to show or know why it matters, then the whole thing becomes a nerdy intellectual hobby of a circle of weirdos, like a video game of some kind. And asking a nerd philosopher, like any other nerd, why are you doing this? They're gonna start murmuring that, I don't know. I know it's weird, but I just like it. And at the serious academic level, the nerd turns into a professional, saying that, oh, this is my job. I'm paid to talk about this stuff. This approach leaves no room for any palpable relevance of philosophy for anyone outside the circle of nerds. You either simply like talking about souls and syllogisms, or you will just pass on it. That's simply how philosophy works. Right? Bullshit. The aim of this channel is to reject this approach and disclose the relevance and elegance of philosophy, and save it from the nerds and professional careerists, the former turning philosophy into a hobby, and the latter turning it into a job. In our attempt to save philosophy, though, we should avoid a different kind of a trap, which is nervously forcing philosophy to become immediately practical. This trap has two faces. The first one, reducing philosophy to a bunch of insightful codes, or sometimes cute pieces of advice. Despite the important benefits of this approach, there is a problem here. Similar to the problem of reducing art to art therapy. Participating in artistic activities and utilizing great works of art definitely helps us deal with all sorts of mental issues, but reducing art to just a tool of that kind would make us blind to its higher value. Reducing Mozart to background music for relaxation covers up the deeper aspects of his art. Looking for something that is immediately practical is looking for something that is effortlessly accessible, and that gives us only a superficial understanding of anything like art, science, and of course, philosophy. In this channel, then, I won't betray philosophy by oversimplifying it. The second way to fall into the trap of forceful usefulness is more annoying to me. It is the act of turning philosophy into the intellectual mouthpiece of an activist group. Engaging in politics or pursuing social causes could be indeed valuable, but if philosophy just becomes the bookish spokesperson of a movement, whatever that is, environmentalists, social justice warriors, libertarians, animal rights groups, etc., it will lose its critical force, its animating spirit, and will eventually vanish in the hands of the mob. As if the right debate, cause, ideal, or value is simply obvious, and all we need to do, all philosophy needs to do, is just giving it some sort of an intellectual twist.
No, no, no.
None of this crap. Not a nerdy hobby, not a lame job, not a bunch of cute insights, not an intellectual mouthpiece of any group. The clue for resurrecting philosophy is in the question we ask when we face anything we consider worthless. Who the hell cares? It is the last word that shows us a way out, a way for philosophy to make sense. Care. Answering the question, why should I care, is basically answering what is valuable and on what grounds. The reason you might prefer eating a decent ramen over listening to Bach, or trying jiu-jitsu over having a beer with a colleague, is based on your value standard. You could give reasons if you're asked why you picked one over the other. Because it's more fun, more useful, or more challenging. Or because you value power, kindness, or freedom. Although you might not be fully conscious of your value standard, that is what determines every decision you make in your life. Take the case of a hedonist as an example. Hedonism, as the value standard, functions as the compass for any move the hedonist makes. You can see this in the short-term life decisions, like preferring partying and drinking over fasting alone in a remote temple. Also in the people our hedonist prefers to hang out with, preferring cool fellows who are down for fun all the time over a long-bearded mathematician. In the long-term life decisions too, like finding a career, our hedonist doesn't look for getting on the top of the ladder of leadership or becoming super rich, but only a fun, easy-to-get job that lets them have better access to pleasurable stuff, so they will take bartending over medicine. Now, to really see the impact of value standards, imagine that our hedonist goes through a personal transformation and becomes a religious person. In this extreme case, you can clearly see the role of value standards in our lives. Everything changes. Every single action. Every single emotion. Every single decision. Every single interpretation of actions, emotions, and decisions. Even the center of focus in the sensory experience. The hedonist might simply visually ignore the homeless person at the corner, while that becomes the center of focus for the religious. The story of values, as you can tell, goes well beyond these two options. There are all sorts of things that could function as our value standard. And all the quick, simple answers of what that standard should be, such as power, love, harmony, happiness, health, and wealth, with some questioning, becomes less obvious and meaningful than they first appear to be. Now, we know that we cannot survive without having a value standard, and that value standard determines the entirety of our lives. So, what is the deal? Which value standard should we pick? Why? What are the options? How could we evaluate value standards to know which one to pick? These questions are not abstract, random, nerdy questions. These are the questions that determine the way we live our lives and make sense of it. These are the questions that give life to philosophy. My atheist fellows, the great foes of the dogmatic and stupid religious mob, how better are you without daring to question the nature of values? How do you make sense of values without a God? My religious fellows, what are you afraid of? Venture out, either prove yourself right and become a fearless believer, or be courageous enough to lose what you have for something better. Your God will love that. So, let the show begin. Wait! It's all true that questioning values gives philosophy its vital force. But values do not make any sense in a vacuum and couldn't be examined in isolation. There is a partner in crime here, and that is our general conception of the world, ourselves, and the relationship between the two. For the lack of a better word, I will call this our worldview. Our worldview generates a context under which value standards could mean anything. Let me clarify this with some examples. One way to think of the relationship between the self and the world is to think of the self as something completely passive, receiving the world simply as it is. From this perspective, the world is just full of stuff. Chairs, fake flowers, pet sunglasses, Harvey Weinstein, KFC, etc. And we are just passively receiving the world. Based on this commonsensical context, values are not going to be anything mysterious at all. As we have this immediate relationship with the world, knowing the right values is just as simple as seeing a tree. Relax. Just look. Don't punch random people in the face, and respect the elderly. But now, consider a religious perspective. In this worldview, first of all, the conception of the world changes. The world is not only the material world we perceive, but also the immaterial world that our senses cannot conceive. God is the supreme being, the creator and the judge. We are not just simple perceivers either, but we have a holy relationship with God. Now, based on this context, everything changes about the values. God, and not common sense, is the source of values. No matter how commonsensical is to value something, it doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, the so-called messengers of God were always against the common sense of their times. The story has changed, the worldview has changed, the values have changed. Now consider a version of scientific reductionism, according to which the world is not full of pistols and angels, but particles and fields. The world is nature. We are not holy beings, but just simply part of the nature. Based on this worldview, the very meaning of values is suspended. If the world is just dead matter, then what the hell is value anyway? Is it just some sort of an illusion? How could we reduce values to the laws of nature? If there is a value standard, then it cannot be grounded on anything merely commonsensical or otherworldly. It has to fit the story of scientific reductionism. You can think of all sorts of other worldviews. The point here is to see that these two elements, value standards and worldviews, go in tandem, and scrutinizing one is dependent on questioning the other. What we deal with in this video series, then, is a combo of these two, which are called the setup. We are going to examine all sorts of setups. In examining the setup, it might be easier to focus on one of these two elements more than the other. So sometimes we focus more on worldviews and sometimes on value standards. It doesn't matter. What matters is to remember it is all in the setup. As much as value standards determine our lives, they cannot act alone. Our life is shaped by the mix of our worldview and value standard, which is our setup. The way we judge, the way we form relationships, the reason we are afraid of death, the way we remember our lives, the way we experience our lives, and in short, the meaning of everything lies in our setup. Once the setup changes, everything changes. And if you look at the history, no matter how firm a setup seems to be, its structure could be bent and, if necessary, could be broken. Think about the people who lose their religion. Well, it's not only about religion, but the setup. In this video series, we are going to interrogate all sorts of setups with the goal of shaping our own. Let's shatter what needs to be shattered, and let's create what begs to be created.